Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee being held on Wednesday, 15th of January 2025. Fire and emergency evacuation procedures for those present in the meeting room. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. Microphones. For participants in the room, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to contribute. When invited to speak, press the button on the right of the microphone unit and speak directly towards the microphone. Please remember to turn your microphone off once you have finished speaking. And if I could ask everybody present, please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. For participants in attendance remotely, can I suggest that you use the raise hand feature in the system if you wish to contribute and to introduce yourself when called upon. We'll be keeping a note if anybody raises their hand and will be informed. Please note that only committee members present in the meeting room are able or eligible to vote. Apologies for absence today have been received from the committee member, Councillor Diana Toynbee, and I'm delighted to welcome Councillor Steph Simmons, who is present as the named substitute for Councillor Toynbee. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome Councillor Elizabeth Foxton officially to this committee, who is replacing Councillor David Hishner. So welcome today, Elizabeth. You're very, very welcome to this committee. Do any members wish to declare any interest in any agenda item? Nope. Okay, minutes. The minutes document of the meeting held on the 13th of November 2024 is included in the agenda at pages 13 to 19. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? All those in favour? Yep. All those that were present? Great, thank you. I will sign those. Questions from members of the public. The committee has received 3 questions from members of the public, and a response to each question has been published in Supplement 2 to the agenda. The questioners have the opportunity to submit a written supplementary question or to join the meeting to ask their supplementary question. Supplementary questions are to be no more than 1 minute in length and must include a question. Can I ask the clerk to confirm if any supplementary questions are to be asked?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had 3 supplementary questions. A written supplementary question has been received from Mrs. Morietska, and Mr. Hardy and Mr. Milne are here in the room to ask their supplementary questions in person. I will display and read out the written question from Mrs. Morietska in just a moment. Okay, so the following supplementary question has been received from Mrs. Morietska. Councillors appear to be confusing 2 separate road schemes, the Southern Link Road A49 to A465 and the Western Bypass A465 to A49. The latter road scheme will cost well over £300 million, not £30 million. The claimed benefits of the whole Western Bypass that apparently goes through a massive housing estate of 10,000 new homes cannot be attributed to the standalone Southern Link Road. At Cabinet on the 13th of January, Councillor Swinglehurst said she was unable to confirm the specific number of houses to be developed to the west of Hereford, yet her Cabinet colleagues claim otherwise, still seeking to allocate 37% of Herefordshire's new housing growth to a floodplain upstream of the city. At the same Cabinet meeting, Councillor Price stated that the Western Bypass was at the full business case stage, so would he advise where this can be found?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. As there is no member from Cabinet here, we will ask the relevant Cabinet member to provide a written response to this supplementary question within 10 working days. I understand we have a supplementary question from Mr. Milne. if you'd like to step forward, Mr. Milne, and ask your supplementary question. Thank you.
For the benefit of our global audience who may not be familiar with the acronyms that we use, I will unscramble them, and this may take me slightly over the minute. The City Link Road evaluation report cited in the response to my question only maps motor traffic counts from 2018 data soon after it opened on a pathway to future congestion. It doesn't and couldn't measure improvements to active or public transport patterns, road safety, air quality, well-being, or severance then or now. Any such benefits remain illusory until or unless the public realm elements of the Hereford City Centre transport package, such as reducing the dual carriageway on Blue School Street to a single carriageway with separate bus and bike lanes and turning Commercial Road into a boulevard, as promised, are delivered and to best practice design. How then will the Council apply the City Link Road lesson that such benefits do not accrue from building motor-only roads, and will it now add bus infrastructure and LTN 120 compliant active travel measures alongside its proposed Southern Link Road and bypass, since these schemes became standalone and lost their transport package elements?
Thank you, Mr. Milne. In a similar way, because there is nobody here from Cabinet, we will once again ask the relevant Cabinet member to provide a written response to your supplementary question within 10 working days. Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Hardy, would you please step forward to ask your supplementary question?
Thank you, Chairman. The response to my question is identical to the response given to Mr. Milne's supplementary at Scrutiny Management on the 16th of December, but does not answer either. Mr. Milne had listed the ATM schemes and their funding and asked for detail about them to enable independent scrutiny of their design against LTN 120. I'd asked for the Council to keep a record of its meetings with ATE and for an invitation to ATE to present to committee. Fortunately, ATE itself keeps notes of these meetings. On 22nd of July 24, ATE encouraged a transport summit for active travel, which the Council postponed. It was supposed to have been in November 24. This is an opportunity to respond appropriately to both mine and Mr. Milne's questions. Can we therefore have a date for this summit and an assurance it will deliver consultative stakeholder engagement on the design detail of the ATM schemes before they are implemented? In particular, I would point out that the plan for the SLR does not include walking and cycling provision, despite the response to my question stating that all highway capital schemes are carefully developed in line with current walking and cycling guidance, such as LTN 120.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Once again, as the relevant Cabinet member isn't present, we will ask the said relevant Cabinet member to provide a written response to you within 10 working days. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, questions from members of the Council. I can confirm that no questions have been received from councillors on this occasion, which takes us on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the LTP, the Local Transport Plan. And I would like to ask the appropriate, is it David or Roger who will be leading and introducing on this item? Thank you. Just to introduce it to members of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. So this was, we were asked to come and provide an update on where we are with local transport plan development. So we submitted a paper for to Scrutiny, which is, I'm not going to read out, I hope, because that will take forever. And but I hope it lays down where we are, what the LTP development process is, and the fact that we aim to have a draft local transport plan in place by the end of March, and then we will go to public consultation on that. So I've got, just to say, I've invited Will Pratt from WSP, who's our consultant leading on the development of the case. So if there's any technical questions, obviously happy to take them. But yeah, is that?
Just to put some context, both people in the room and those who may be watching online, the reason this is on the agenda today is because we were supposed to be looking at the draft LTP at today's meeting. But because of circumstances beyond our control, obviously that's been pushed back with for various reasons, but we wanted to make sure that as a committee we kept our eye, so to speak, on the development of the LTP to see how we can assist and make sure it comes together in a timely manner, because it's an incredibly important document for the council. I've got a few questions. I know other members of the committee have. I'm happy to kick off unless anybody else wants to start with a couple of questions. Firstly, what are the risks of delays to the draft LTP timeline and what mitigations are in place?
So I'll take that. I'll start off with, if you don't mind.
Could you pull your mic down a bit, Roger? Sorry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm not that tall. So I guess just in terms of context, the reason why we've delayed the programme is because the National Planning Policy Framework was out to consultation after following the election and national change of government. The outcome of that is, and as was kind of raised at the point in which the consultation started, was that the housing numbers that we've been allocated, and mandatory housing targets that we've been allocated for the county to deliver, have risen significantly. So we were looking at, in the next 20 years, 16,000 houses across the county. That's now gone up to over 27,000 houses. So it would be slightly mad of us to have charged on with a local transport plan without fully thinking about where is that growth in population going to be, and how are we going to appropriately service that with the public transport provision and active transport provision that we need now for the county. So that's why we've delayed progressing until the National Planning Policy Frameworks come out, and so that we can align the development of the local land use plan with the local transport plan, so as we've got an integrated approach to future delivery. In terms of the risks of the delay from what we were planning, there is no hard deadline, unless Dave corrects me, from government for when we have to have the local transport plan finished. So we're not at risk of not meeting a national requirement. Obviously, what we want to do is to make sure that we are working through robustly to have the best local transport plan that we can, that meets our future service needs. So now that the National Planning Policy Framework was published on the 22nd of December, the local plan team are working through the implications for that and how we take forward the local plan, and are working very closely with Dave around how we then manage that alongside the local transport plan. So it would have been a greater risk not to align those two pieces of work than what it is in terms of now managing the risks in terms of that delay.
Thank you. And while there might not be a set timeline as far as Westminster is concerned, or in a little way, this committee has put it on its work programme for March to look at the draft LTP. So what is the likelihood we will see a draft LTP for our March meeting, please?
Can I ask Will to come in on this? But I don't, as far as I'm concerned, yes, you'll see one.
Okay.
I'm
very happy for Will to come in on this. It's just, I'm very keen that in the past, reports have been promised, and through no fault of anybody's, they've ended up being pushed back. And I want to make sure that if it's on our work programme, that we are going to be in a situation where we can look at it, and that any event, we're looking forward, and it's a realistic target to have it brought to our committee in March. So, Will, do you want to come in on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the short answer to that is yes. It should be available for March. The slightly longer answer is we currently have a sort of draft version of the local transport plan, which we've been using to engage with a number of key stakeholders over the last few months. The commission that WSP have with the council runs up until the end of March this year, and I very much intend that we would have the draft LTP and the required statutory environmental assessments all complete, that would be in a place ready for public consultation by the end of, or the documents be ready, we're in a state to do that by the end of March this year.
That's great. That really is. That's excellent news. I've got another question, and okay, sorry, do you want to come in, Bruce? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had an extra lengthy read of this yesterday, and I thought I'd read it with a view to being a resident as opposed to a member of the council. And there were two things in there that struck me. One of them, and these were good ideas, one of them was a hourly bus service from all the market towns into the city. Now, I thought that would be great. I mean, I could do that. I live just off a bus route near Burley Gate on the A465, and it comes down there. But the problem is from where my lane comes out on the main road, there are no footpaths, so I wouldn't be able to walk to the bus stop. So that one's out. And so the next one was walking and cycling, and I thought, well, I'm not going to walk. And if I was a bit younger, I might like to cycle into the city from my place. But would I want to cycle down the A465 as it was this morning, foggy and wet and horrible? Probably no. And so how are we going to get there? So, and I think anyone who lives outside of the city or the market towns themselves, will you really want to be cycling into the city from those areas where there's national speed limit applies, there are no cycle tracks, there are no footpaths if you want to walk? It's very tricky. So what we're looking at, I think, is a bit of a wish list, aspirations for the future, maybe. And I'm happy to see how this might develop in the future. But we've got to be careful about what we do wish for, because a lot of the time it's not going to be possible.
Thanks, Bruce. I've got a question that maybe touches on that, which might help. How are we ensuring alignment with the daughter documents to the LTP? And by that I mean the LC whip, the bus services improvement plan, the EV strategy, please. Is that one for Will?
Yeah, I think so. We'll take you through the process of how we make sure that the LC whip is feeding into the LTP. Sorry to use all those acronyms, that's horrible.
Yeah, that's the local cycle and walking strategy, Bruce, for you two touched on it, and which is a separate document. But what I'm trying to see is how we're ensuring there's alignment between all of these different strategies.
Yes, thank you, Jet. So, I mean, the development is very much cognizant of what's been set out and proposed in the bus service improvement plan, the walking cycle plan, and the EV strategy. We've had follow-up or separate meetings with the team leading on development of electric vehicle infrastructure for the council, met with a number of bus operators, and I guess pulled out obviously the key priorities or key measures in the bus service improvement plan, which are set out in more detail in the LTP, in particular a short-term action plan, and likewise with walking and cycling. If I could add to that, and perhaps to come back to, I think it's Councillor Baker's question, there's probably 2 points in there. One is that yes, the local transport plan sort of sets out the aspiration of what's to be achieved in the next 10 or 15 years. I think wish list is probably a slightly harsh phrase to use. The reality is that a lot of funding is uncertain. Traditionally, probably around 90% of the funding for transport infrastructure is not within the authority's immediate control. A large part comes from external funding, such as the Department for Transport, and another significant chunk, typically, I guess, probably over a third, comes from new development. And I think Roger's point about ensuring the LTP and local plan are aligned not just makes sense, is really important for maximising the chance of getting funding for the LTP. And paragraph 12 of the report sort of sets out that the reality is that the LTP needs to set out the aspirations for a number of different modes to ensure that the authority is as well placed as it can be to take advantage of funding opportunities that come up as and when they do over the next few years.
Thanks, Will. Councillor Phillips, then Councillor Simmons.
Yes, thank you. Well, we're not inventing the wheel. Everybody's at this, and I was wondering what best practice is influencing us from other rural authorities as well, because the rural hub spoke that we've got is not unique. We have a very good example of it, and in particular relationship with our neighbouring counties. I am, of course, also conscious that the government has a big political agenda with regard to the reform of councils in England. And obviously there are aspirations to create strategic mayoral authorities. And I have no doubt that one of their powers will be strategic transport. And I think we shouldn't be naive about that as to wherever that mayoral authority grows. I suppose at the timetable at the moment, we've got to get on and deal with what we've got to deal, but we've got to know that that's in the background. The issue for me very clearly, and it was very sensible that, of course, we have this delay, because the increase in housing to 27,000 houses between now and 2041, where they're going to go let's be quite clear, that's a pressure on transport. Let's not be naive about that. Now, whether they go, what proportion goes in the city, market towns, rural areas, that also needs to be fed in. I am quite fed up of A and B roads being used in this county because there's not a proper infrastructure around the city. You go and talk to people in the Golden Valley who have huge forestry lorries going on a B road because there ain't no possible sensible way to get through Hereford City. And that's something that doesn't come through in conversations because we live in a rural area and therefore not important. And on buses and all the rest of it, I know Hereford is the centre, I know it is our service centre, but we have market towns, and the bus links between market towns are also important as well. Because, you know, gone are the days when they could be used as vehicles to go to work. That's gone, but they are very, very important to regard the sustainability of those as well. So I think I commend the fact that you have paused in order to absorb these things, but these are the determining pressures that are on it. And I think we will need to be sleight of foot all the way through. How this government will treat transport in rural areas, because if it treats transport in rural areas like it's treated the rest of rural areas elsewhere, God help us.
Councillor Simmons was next. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, for coming and providing us as much information as you can at this stage. I do understand the difficulties with the NPPF housing allocations, the need to review that. I think my concerns are probably more directed at Will and just whether he can help answer. Obviously, I think WSP wrote the DFT guidance that was sort of shelved as the transition across. Are WSP aware of where the government's thinking is currently as to whether they are revising the LTP guidance, whether they are giving you any sounds as to where they're likely to look to put funding for councils and LTPs? That's my first question. I'll just deal with that one first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Partly aware. So to go back a step, I probably should say so. I previously was part of the team that drafted the LTP guidance under the previous national government. It ran into a trouble, I think, because there was an aspiration to really closely tie carbon reduction targets with local transport plan funding, which my understanding is politically, whilst there was a desire from the Department for Transport, that wasn't necessarily matched at a political level, particularly with some of the changes that took place to the government at the time. I'm aware that the current government have said they're looking to publish new LTP guidance, and there might be links to carbon around that. I don't know the specific details, other than it's something we're trying to find out more about. But what I would say is the current draft Herefordshire LTP has been developed mindful of that draft LTP guidance that was produced a few years ago.
Thank you. Well, that's helpful. Also, I'm assuming that WSP are running the SEA alongside this strategic environmental assessment for the LTP.
Yes.
Yeah. And could you confirm that that is a truly iterative process, and that the initial high-level objectives that clearly you're working to, if you have a kind of working draft for consultation, have fully taken into account the SEA findings? And has that been fed back to our team here?
Could we just have some explanation of acronyms for those that might not be familiar, please?
Yeah, sorry. So strategic environmental assessment is stems from a European piece of legislation that was transposed through regulations in this country, which I had some involvement in. So my knowledge of this, I just want to understand where we are, because it is often not an iterative process. It therefore doesn't, it often gets sort of bolted on, tacked on. And I just want to ensure, because what I'm seeing in this priorities for the transport network, etc., are not sufficient understanding that we've declared a climate and ecological emergency. And I want to try and understand where you're at with the SEA and how much that has really truly fed back into our objectives.
So thank you. I think there's probably two parts to that question. The first around the objectives reflect what I guess was approved at Cabinet, I believe, earlier this year and went out to consultation, which was strongly supported by residents. In terms of progressing the SEA, that has been done alongside and in a sort of iterative process interlinked with the LTP. As we've started to develop the objectives and some of the draft strategy, there's been engagement with the environment teams, in particular the SEA scoping consultation, which is a statutory requirement, as I'm sure you're aware, Councillor Simmons, was undertaken in, like I say, August or September 2024. And the feedback from that is being used, informing the update of the draft LTP before the sort of draft SEA work takes place. And for the member, I guess, apologies if I'm explaining anything that people are aware of, but for those who may not be aware, the strategic environmental appraisal, a draft of that has to be a statutory requirement to be consulted on alongside the draft LTP, and that is the programme that we are currently working to.
Thank you very much. Well, that's reassuring. Just in terms of, David, with regard to the emerging strategy and the priorities for the transport network, I'm just concerned that we're limiting. So, for example, we've got 3,000 kilometres of roadside verges. Well, not all verges, I appreciate it's the network, but there is I'm not seeing anything coming through in here to sort of as a priority for nature enhancement or protection, which was one of the key findings and recommendations from a previous scrutiny committee that was captured. And I can't see how we can deliver against our targets for a nature and climate emergency if we're not capturing it in the very high level LTP priorities. So that's why I'm concerned that we haven't picked those up. I'm not seeing it here, even in this kind of. These will obviously go through to the draft that will be consulted on. You won't go back and change the high level objectives. You won't go back and change the priorities for the network once this is this far along in the path. So I would like to see these change and this to be really caught and picked up in here. Thank you.
Could I suggest that would be a recommendation from scrutiny then into Cabinet? That seems like a way to kind of.
I think the problem was that it was a recommendation from a previous, and it hasn't been done. So I can make a recommendation, and that it is, but we haven't been listened to in this, and I would really, and we have said it at full council as well. So there has to be a mechanism that this is properly captured. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. There's no doubt in my mind that buses are the most important part of this particular process. We all know about cars. We can forget about cars. They will be there forever. And walking and cycling, well, that's a matter for a personal view, I think, whether you're going to do that and take your life in your hands. But buses, I mean, I grew up with buses. My dad was a trolley bus driver after the war for many years, and so I was involved with it. And the particular routes that they drove, there was a 4-minute headway. Can you imagine that here? Rather than one every 4 hours, here you get every 4 minutes. And so when you move out from the big cities into beautiful Herefordshire, you're not quite ready for the lack of a decent bus service. Whereas if you're born here, I suppose you just accept it as the status quo and just say, well, we have to lump it. But I think we need to make a positive view with buses. And I think one of our major problems here is that it's not a single company running them. Whereas in London, for example, it used to be good old London Transport ran the whole of Greater London, and it was quite efficient in those days. But here we have various companies who, some of them don't want to do a particular route because it doesn't make any money. And that is a big problem, and that's one of the reasons we don't have a regular 1-hour service from the market towns into Hereford. So if we can arrange that, then that's a positive. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bruce. Was there a specific question there? No. Okay, no problem. Just in case I missed it, sorry. Roger.
Yeah, really, it was the point that I made that probably I was probably too polite in the way I constructed it. It is about the reality that is the issue. I have, most thinking in this country now is urban in intensity. And what Bruce has just said was all about London. Well, London's a different planet. Anyone who goes to London and understands about public transport, it might be similar in Manchester and a little bit in Birmingham, but it ain't the rural areas. And it is very different. And we in Herefordshire are not some island in the Pacific. And it really is to try and get a feel as to what best practice and what you're getting and where our similarities is with other rural LTPs. Because to be frank, I have a real concern with the new government on how it understands rural areas. They seem to think they're all very affluent and wealthy and they can all drive around in, I don't know, big four-wheel drives or something like that. They don't understand the complexity of it. And so really whilst we're talking about our specific LTP, my point really about rurality is where are our allies? Because we are going to need allies in this to make the case. And this isn't just about Herefordshire's LTP, it's about others as well. We are unique, we know that, and we have specific issues. But we will need to form those alliances because otherwise I think, I'm fed up of hearing about Andy Burnham and how marvellous it is in Manchester. London's a different planet. What about the rural areas? It isn't as easy to solve. And, when we have all these new houses and all these new households who are also going to put pressure on the system, I don't think they've got that understanding. And so I want to know where our allies are.
Yeah, by all means, thank you. Then Roger.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor. So we have what's called an enhanced partnership arrangement because certainly taking Councillor Baker's point, we have 9/11 bus operators in the county, depending on how you sort of cut that up. That's really unusual. Most local authorities have one or two main operators. So we're trying to manage 9 different bus operators. And we don't have very many powers of management. When I say manage, they're private businesses and they do certainly commercial routes. We subsidise about 2/3 of the routes, maybe slightly less than that. So we have a certain amount of power over those subsidised routes. We don't have any power over commercial routes. The mechanism that we have to engage with bus operators is called an enhanced partnership. This was set up by the previous government, and this is connected to a thing called BSIP, Bus Service Improvement Plan. Sorry for unending acronyms for these things. So last week we held a board meeting of the enhanced partnership, and that hasn't happened certainly since I started about a year ago. So we are trying to get that back on track, at least that dialogue between us and bus operators. And of course they've come to the table because there is some BSIP funding available. Not very much, I hasten to add. And to sort of try and buy in Councillor Phillips' point, it's now funding that's done by allocation rather than competition. And whilst that's sort of good because everyone gets a bit, actually everyone gets a much smaller bit. And we do much worse out of it because our population is very low, as you know. So we're kind of hampered on both those regards, really. We've got a small population, it's very dispersed. We have lots of different operators, many of which can't even come to the table to talk to us because they're out sort of driving their buses. The national issue is there's a shortage of drivers. And that plays out in our area as much as it does in London or in Manchester. And I'll come back to the London-Manchester thing, why that's always talked about. The DFT were here with us last week as well to talk to bus operators. And what they're very keen on, because buses is one of their 5 missions. So it's become mission-led government, as I'm sure you're aware of. One of the DFT's missions is about buses. They're very keen to improve buses. So hence an upgrade on how much we've had from BSIP for next year. Oh, is it the year? Anyway, next year. So what they're very keen on is franchising. So they're keen to bus franchise. Now, of course, that's fine if you're in London or if you're in Manchester and you can say, but what they're trying to do, DFT are trying to say, is there's different ways of doing franchising. So my concern about franchising is actually most of our routes don't make any money. So franchising, generally, the risk sits with the local authority and the bus operators just bid to run that route. And it doesn't matter whether one person or 200 people get on that bus, they get paid the same. The risk sits with local authorities. Now, we're not in that position. I don't think we've got that position to invest the kind of amounts of money that Andy Burnham has. So we need to think of different ways of doing that. So we are in conversation with people like Shropshire quite regularly because they've got their on-demand system, which is a form of demand responsive transport, hence the name. But it's slightly different, and I don't want to get into details here. I'm happy to have a sort of offline conversation about that. But that's one of our allies. That's one way to think about how we might tackle buses better, certainly in rural areas. For us, one of the things we also need to bake into this is home to school transport and SEN transport, because we know that's an enormous budget pressure. And how do we align those two things, or can we align those two things? So we have regular conversations with people like Midlands Connect, who are our subnational transport body. So we are trying to build those alliances, Councillor. We've been speaking to Transport for Wales, because they're about to franchise essentially the whole of Wales, and what can we learn from that? And we have got the ear of DfT. I take your point about rural. I think one of the rural issues is that no one really knows how to solve that. So I know we're aware that, for example, Jersey have got a franchising model. Of course, that's great, but I think there's probably maybe two. There's not very many. It's a very different kettle of fish. So, and that's buys into your point that we're rural, but actually there's different kinds of rural. And how do we solve that? We're working with Gloucestershire. We're trying to help them expand their demand responsive transport service in the Forest of Dean to see if we can, how much we can use that partly for our school children. So I think I haven't got a kind of, this is what we're going to do, but in terms of we are trying really hard to sort of expand our thinking about how we can improve this. The bus service improvement plan will help us to pass more money on to operators to run routes that they wouldn't have been interested in the past. And that's the kind of governance mechanism for that BSIP pot of money, is that it goes to enhanced partnership, and then it's a kind of negotiation between us and the bus operators about new routes and new.
Can I just jump in and back to that, Roger? Obviously, we're still in the consultation phase here, are we not? Correct me if I'm wrong. We're still talking to both sort of interested parties and residents. If residents want to feed into this into this phase, into the LTP, which I'm guess that there's not much time left, how can they do it? How are we ensuring that residents can contribute to the LTP in a meaningful way, particularly residents in rural areas, to talk about things like bus services? How are we consulting directly with residents?
So, Councillor, once we've got the draft LTP by the end of March, then we will go out to formal public consultation.
Okay, so they're not actually feeding into our thinking around the draft then at this stage?
No, because what we determined from consultation is we want to have something to consult on. So we did an old engagement piece back in the spring.
Okay.
And there is a report on that, and I think we've referenced it in here. So we did do an engagement piece. With,
sorry.
That's all right. With residents, and we went out to we basically mirrored what the local plan team were doing. So we sort of hung on their coattails and went out to market towns and to rural areas, and there was an online survey, and we went out to the colleges as well. We did face-to-face meetings with colleges. Got quite a good number of young people responding as well. So that was the engagement stage, which is now fed into what is one of the things that's feeding into what the draft will look like, and then we will go and consult on the draft. So there has been.
Okay, so there's been an initial phase. Will, if you could come in, that's great. I think you want to jump in. I just want to make sure that people have got the opportunity to throw in their ideas, and then they're being properly listened to, particularly in rural areas, which I think is so important.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I put my hand up because I think I was going to say, similar to what David said, that there was a consultation early in 2024. I guess I would say that was sort of understanding residents' issues and priorities, and using that information or data essentially to help develop a draft plan. And then the next stage is to consult on a draft plan that people can provide their feedback. So there's sort of a second round of public engagement as part of the development.
Do you have a strategy for how that will proceed?
Well, I've got, I guess, timescales, but not necessarily the approach for the questions and the number of road shows or in-person events, etc. I think that's something we can work up in due course.
Yeah, Councillor Simmons.
Just following on David's comments about demand responsive transport, I'm really pleased to hear that you're looking at Gloucestershire and what's been happening in the Forest of Dean. I'm just noting with regard to the market towns and rural areas strategy and the focus on the hub and spoke, I called for a bus summit at full council, probably much to your annoyance, sorry. But I want to try and explore more that issue and the fact that we have the rural areas which feed into the spokes and to get into the hubs, but we really need more sort of demand responsive transport. We need to look at how we can work with the community providers like Community Action Ledbury and where they exist in other places to really support them to do the work they're already doing, but in a kind of joined up way with our bus providers. So I'm really keen to feed into that enhanced bus partnership, Herefordshire Council relationship as part of this LTP. Thank you.
Roger, then Roger.
Look, I'm going to suggest a recommendation from the Scrutiny Committee, and that is that we actually recommend that there is more work done with other rural LTPs. North Yorkshire, Westmoreland come to mind. Well, Devon, Cornwall, but Westmoreland and North Yorkshire are very much similar to us as well. And I'm not getting a feel for that understanding. And I think also that can help to reaffirm that what we're doing, you know, that there is no silver bullet that somebody's discovered that we haven't picked up. But also it starts to build that weight of body of local authorities, which I think we will need in future to campaign for investment in rural and semi-rural highways.
Thank you, Roger. Roger can come in, and then I think we've got Elizabeth, and then Will, unless it relates to the current topic, in which case, is it a separate question, Elizabeth?
No.
It relates, fine. Then Will.
So I guess kind of a couple of things. You make a very important point, Councillor Phillips, about the current national policies impacting on rural areas, because it's not just the local transport plan. We've got disproportionate increase in housing numbers compared to rural areas. Actually, proportionately, say Westmoreland's combined authority housing allocation has come down as opposed to gone up. We've had the rural grant kind of taken away. So rural areas are one of the few authorities where actually their funding settlement is less rather than more. And the approach government is taking at the moment to discussions around investment and economic growth tends to be through the nations and regions groups, which is talking only to combined authority mayoral areas, really largely to the exclusion of the rest of the country currently. So there are concerns about how we put forward our case for rural areas across a number of items, of which the local transport plan is obviously a really key one. There are obviously county council network and their rural services network and others that we can work through, but we'll need closer engagement with other authorities like some of the ones that you mentioned and our neighbours who also face some of those same challenges. There is a transport group as part of the Marches Forward partnership kind of area, which realise it kind of crosses the border, and it's not, some of the challenges aren't quite exactly the same, but obviously Shropshire's challenges are similar to ours, and Powys and Monmouthshire are very rural as well in terms of looking at some of their transport needs. And obviously some of the things we need to think about, and obviously the benefit of having people like Will as well, who's got the national knowledge and understanding of what's going on elsewhere fitting into the plan. But it's around our kind of connections for commuters and workflow and people into the adjoining areas as well, and how the transport provision will help meet that. For example, people living in Worcester and working here, or working here and living in Worcester, all of those things need to be kind of fully considered as part of the outcome. And just picking up on the consultation approach, so. There is a danger we'll be consulting people to death over the next kind of year or 18 months, given that we've got the local plan, amongst others, to come forward. So the intention is that we look at how we do that in a coordinated way. So if we want to bring forward the local plan within the current kind of timeframe set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, that'll have to be concluded by the end of 2026. So there'll be a very intensive period of consultation for both around the local transport plan and the local plan, and it would make sense that we do that in a way that's kind of joined up rather than trying to go out to engage the same people twice on something that looks unconnected. So we're working through how we will best do that beyond March.
Would it be unreasonable for us to ask for you to provide us with a consultation strategy with a timeline?
No, it wouldn't, and actually one of the things that I would recommend in terms of your forward programme is perhaps we need to bring back the outcome of the National Planning Policy Framework impact on the local plan, the timescales for that, and we can bring perhaps the consultation.
But you're saying that the local plan and the LTP are going to be
Aligned.
Aligned, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to come in, Elizabeth? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a reference in paragraph 2 to changed travel plans. What's the status of the Council's knowledge of these changes? The Council has spent a lot of money on its capability to assess changes since the last data was supplied. What's the cost and progress, and when can an analysis be made to the committee?
Okay, Will, do you want to come in on that, and then you can also answer? I think you had something else to say as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can come in on that. So the comment in paragraph 2 relates to the way changes in the way people travel. I guess there have been significant changes in the way people access services, which have really, I guess, the rate of change has been accelerated by a increased amount of digital access. So more people shop online or will work from home certain days of the week. That trend started sort of the year 2000 and has really accelerated since 2010. That, I guess, has continued from then to now. In addition, we've obviously had the COVID pandemic in 2020, which has also had an impact, and a short-term and long-term impact on how people travel. We've got that data sort of nationally around what that means for different trip purposes, and can provide that very easily if needed. That has been considered in development of the LTP. I think people be aware some of the obvious highlights of that a lower proportion of money is spent in bricks and mortar stores. That is a particular challenge for bus operators, who traditionally their largest market was passengers travelling for retail purposes. On the flip side, we know that leisure travel has been increasing, and that's something that bus operators were keen to explore. And certainly, I think you see a lot of the rail industry advertising around leisure travel, and I think a lot of that is in response to the way that people travel, or the type of trips people make has been changing. If it's okay, I'd quite like to come in on the rural question, if that's okay.
That's fine, Will. Yeah, thank you.
So firstly, and I probably should have responded earlier, was to reassure members that we are very aware of best practice. I think, as Roger mentioned, we are a national consultancy. We have a team who I would say they're the national leads in rural mobility, and the leader of that team is one of our sort of expert peer reviewers of the strategy. In addition, and Councillor Phillips mentioned some other authorities. I probably should have added for context. I spent the majority of my career in local authority. I was previously leader of the transport planning team at Devon County Council. I'm very aware of the challenges and actually what's feasible in rural areas, and have actually still working with Devon to help develop their strategy, and have worked with other, I guess, predominantly rural counties such as West Berkshire. So I think that's reflected in the draft strategy. I recognise that people, it's very difficult to come up with lots of measures for rural areas. The funding or there's not necessarily the density of travel. But I think what's set out includes sort of pragmatic measures that are realistic for rural areas. Some of those recognise some of the challenges around funding. I think there's let's go for 21E, which talks around working with communities or understanding community priorities for quieter lanes to improve walking, cycling. That's a slightly different approach to delivery, a bit more sleight of foot, to use Councillor Phillips' phrase, which tries to adapt and recognise that funding for big segregated routes is challenging to get for rural areas, and they might need a slightly different approach. And that's what the LTP sets out. That sort of approach would also help with, I think, providing better routes for nature, for example. And finally, I think to give members hopefully a bit more reassurance that this may recall, I think last year that originally we were talking around having the three places in the strategy being Hereford City, market towns and rural. We've consciously made a change to put market towns and rural together, so that they they're quite closely interlinked. But B, I think if that gives them greater weight, and by having the main place strategies being Hereford City and rural and market towns, I think it makes the rural place part of the LTP a much more prominent part of the transport strategy and priorities going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. I'm going to try and draw this together now. I feel like we've reached unless are committee members keen to ask more questions. I've got a few recommendations I pulled together. If anyone else, unless someone's burning to ask more questions, I think there's a recommendation around the verges, the 3,000 kilometres of verges and nature enhancement. Yes, Councillor Simmons.
Sorry, Chair. There was just one thing I want to really try and understand. The timeframes in terms of delivery of various aspects of the LTP measures as they come forward. There's obviously one element, we've got the road strategy. We've obviously also got the active travel measures that we have. Obviously, it's been raised by public question, concerns about active travel measures on certain new road strategy builds. I just want to make sure that we are delivering upfront within the LTP programme those active travel measures within the market towns, within Hereford, that these aren't kind of becoming at a later stage in the LTP rollout. Have we got any clarity at this stage in the LTP development on timescale for delivery of the various packages and elements that are in there? Thank you.
Do you want to come in on that, David?
I'm mostly going to ask Will to do this, but I would say we are close to going out to consultation with the local cycling, walking and wheeling investment infrastructure plan and the LTP. That's one of the daughter documents, as you know. So that actually details much more. And I mean, I don't know if Scrutiny would be interested in seeing the LSWIP. It's in a similar process, and I guess the problem goes back to Roger's point earlier.
We had quite a long meeting on the LC whip last year, as I recall.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. But that's a third thing to consult on. So there's something we need. I think maybe that needs to be part of the consultation strategy as well. That you asked for. I think that's probably we need to put the else. Okay, great. That's what I was going to. Yeah, that's what I was going to.
Did Will want to come in on that?
As you can add, I'm sure members are aware the rate of delivery is probably very much dependent on what funding is available. If the government makes a lot more funding available for active travel, a lot of those measures will come forward sooner rather than later. Some of that is probably outside the authorities' hands, other than what members decide through the capital programme. I would say, I think the noises from government would suggest that they're likely to make the bigger chunks of funding available for buses, which seems to be, as Dave said, one of the key missions at the moment.
I suppose the recommendation possibly, sorry, Chair, to jump in, would be that we have those elements worked up within the LTP at an earlier stage, ready to jump when government, if government manages to turn on the taps on that basis. So just like that to be captured. Thank you. Thanks, David. Thank you, Will.
Shovel ready to take advantage, I think, is what we're saying there, isn't it? Yeah, Rob?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on delivery of...
Could you pull your microphone down towards you, Rob? Thanks.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me? Sure, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say something else on the delivery of active travel with regard particularly to cycling. Councillor Baker mentioned earlier that people can cycle if they want to take their life in their hands, and it obviously shouldn't be that way. So it's important to deliver the sort of infrastructure to enable people to make that choice. I'm aware that there were some good active travel measures in the sort of current or previous plan, but I'm aware that some of those have been reduced. Specifically, I'm thinking of Ayleston Hill and Commercial Road, which has been sort of cut in half, so that it no longer goes all the way into town, but it stops kind of somewhere near the railway bridge. And that may be a budgetary thing, but I'm just concerned that might get lost. So are changes like that being picked up in the new LC whip, and so to hopefully continue them and provide us with meaningful structure rather than having the classic thing of cycle lanes that go nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Owens. Who would like to come in on that? David?
I'm hoping, Chair, that the LCWIP,
Yeah.
LCWIP, okay.
That's not a character from Coronation Street.
The LCWIP will do exactly that, because I'm aware that there's been lots of, across the country, there's cycle lanes that seem to go nowhere and last for a metre or less. There's one in Stroud that I think is literally 80 centimetres long. It must have taken more to, I don't know why that sort of stuff gets in. So yes, I think we are increasing our knowledge of that. I think the LSWIP really should tackle that and make sure we don't put those lanes in that go nowhere and finish, or don't finish and don't start. So it seems a waste of money to put something in that's only half done. It'd be better to put it somewhere else. Yes, I sorry, not knowing specifics about Elston Hill. That's it with other colleagues, but I'm sure we could get an answer on that if you wanted.
That's probably more of an issue for Cabinet, perhaps. But yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to suggest we're going to phrase some questions. I think we'll take a short break shortly, but just so people are aware that I'm taking 4 possible recommendations away from this initial session, so thank you all for that. Looking at a recommendation, making sure that nature enhancement along the 3,000 kilometres of verges across the county is an LTP priority. That more work be done with other potentially neighbouring rural LTPs, Marches, Forest of Dean, just to see how we can integrate our LTP with our rural neighbours. To provide us with a consultation strategy, both for the local plan and the LTP, alongside its daughter documents, with a timeline that outlines fully who's going to be consulted, exactly and how they're going to be consulted, how that consultation strategy is going to be delivered, as I say, with a timeline. And then possibly another recommendation that's just come out at the end, which I think would be quite good, looking at active travel projects and the BSIP, ensuring that any projects are shovel ready as soon as possible to maximise the potential of securing government funding. Does the committee feel that those have reflected the conversation?
Yeah, but mine was a bit wider than just the neighbouring counties. It was other rural authorities like North Yorkshire, like Westmoreland.
I'll add that to the recommendation. We'll phrase something and we'll prove it at the end.
I've sent something through.
Thank you very much. I haven't seen that. Yes, Councillor Simmons.
Ditto. Again, it was slightly wider than simply enhancement of roadside verges. It was more. So again, I've drafted something for.
Thank you. But those are the 4 areas, that obviously wording to be agreed, that we're going to take away from this particular item. Yep. I'm going to suggest we take a brief comfort break and that we start again in 10 minutes. We've got a lot to get through. Thank everybody for your patience, particularly clerks who've had to sit through that. We never know how long these items are going to take. Sometimes they're quicker than others, but hopefully it was an interesting insight into how we're developing the local transport plan. But 10 minutes and we'll be with you. Thank you very much. Could we stop the live feed, please? Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 8, the Market Towns investment plans. We've been provided with an overview of the Market Town investment plans. The report that's was sent out with them with the agenda for this particular item, which happened in 21-22. And the purpose of this item is to seek the views of the Scrutiny Committee on the benefits of the process and how projects have been identified and are progressing. And I think Roger's going to begin with an introduction on this. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, Councillor Driscoll. So I guess just by way of background, really briefly. So the intent of bringing forward the Market Town investment plans, which was led very much by the kind of previous administration, was that at the time Hereford had been allocated some money called Stronger Towns funding, and in response to that, we had to develop a towns plan that went to government to say what we would do with that money. The intention was to create similar plans for the market towns so that we were in a place to be able to bid for and take forward priorities for those towns in the future should the government grant funding become available. So the commission happened in 2020 around the COVID period, so it took a little time to kind of work through for the plans to be developed and come to cabinet. But the intention was that they would be kind of developed locally in partnership with the town councils and local people to create the basis for a kind of an evidence-based plan so that we would be able to seek resources and also then guide council resources into the towns, into the right places. So that's where the kind of the rationale for where we've got them. We did in the last Levelling Up Fund round, we used the Market Town investment plans as the basis to bid into government for the two big allocations that we could pitch for, and we were able to use the plans to kind of support that kind of evidence requirement and the local population support for that activity. So we bidded in for Ross Enterprise Park in the southern constituency area, and we bidded in for an amalgamation of 3 projects across Ledbury and Leominster in the northern constituency area. Unfortunately, neither of those bids were successful. We got some money for the transport hub in Hereford instead. Since then, there's been no national kind of big government capital grant government round that we've been able to bid in for with the plans. But the plans themselves have provided, as you'll see within the report, the basis for some of the COVID recovery support that was provided into the towns and some of the activity that's happened since then. Ross Enterprise Park is going forward through council's own. You all kindly agreed to put some money into the capital programme to help bring forward Ross Enterprise Park, which should be on site in this year now, by the end of 2025. But there are obviously lots of great ideas still in the plans that would need further development and funding should that become available to us, or a route to accessing that in the future. So just kind of by way of background, really, that's where we are. Huge thanks to the clerks for joining us today as well, who were instrumental in helping us form the plans and kind of coordinating and getting local engagement and in now delivering the plans and all of the activity really that's outlined in there, apart from where it's kind of highways and public realm. They've all really been delivered by the town councils or led by the town council. Certainly a lot of the COVID recovery money was directly led by the councils themselves, who've done a great job in delivering those activities over the last few years.
Thank you, Roger. And I think you didn't touch on the next stage, which I guess is the feasibility studies. David, do you want to mention where we're at with that? Thank you.
Yeah, by all means. As Roger said, there's been limited opportunities for funding being offered by government recently, but one of them has been UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So what we identified within the UK Shared Prosperity Fund under the heading of feasibilities, and that was quite limited, that was the category we were looking at, was £25,000 per market town to take forward feasibility work to try and progress some of this. So over the last 4 or 5 months, I guess, we've been engaging with town councils to identify which are the priorities, which work, and obviously try and fit that into the profile for a feasibility study. It's been not without its ups and downs, but we are now in the process where I think in 2 cases we've got consultants on board, and in the other 3 cases we're either out to tender or we're just finalising the arrangements to get consultants on board, with a view to having reports back at the end of March. And what those have tried to do is focus on reasonably chunky projects that are seen as a priority by the town councils to take them to the next level, where they either perhaps are ruled in or ruled out, or are at a stage where they're closer to the point where they can be applying for funding. But yeah, it's and the issue about the challenge is just about the capacity for consultants to take on these projects and making sure that they're the right fix. But fingers crossed, by certainly within the next week or so, we should have consultants on board for all the projects.
Thank you. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to ask the clerks for their views, if you would like to feed in your views to this committee. What I'm keen to hear is how you have felt with your council, the process for initially creating the Market Towns investment plans was handled. Whether you felt that you were engaged with sufficiently, and your views on how possibly it could be improved, were we to do something like this in the future, and from your particular perspective, from each individual market town, what are your views and potentially the views of your council on the market town investment plans, and what you're looking forward to as far as the feasibility studies are concerned, and how any recommendations you've got for how we can help make sure that as much we squeeze as much value from these plans as we possibly can. Are you happy for me to go to speak to each of you in turn? Is that all right? Liz, do you want to speak on behalf of Kington to begin with?
Thinking on my feet here with a strong cup of coffee.
Would you pull the mic down and speak towards it? Thank
better?
you.
As far as Kington's concerned, being one of being the smallest market town, then certainly the process that involved Rose Regeneration as the consultants to complete the plan was very smooth, and it involved lots of consultations with businesses, with the voluntary sector, with the public, and with the town council. And I was council very happy with the way that process went, and the way in which the plan was drafted, and the consultation back with the town council in terms of how that was prepared, and the final outcome was certainly town council were very happy with all of that. It provided a very useful evidence base for subsequent projects that we undertook. Bear in mind that, as I say, it's the smallest market town, our resources are very limited, but we were able to use that as the evidence base for some of the projects that we then managed in terms of things like the High Street regeneration. We had a shopfront grant scheme, for example, that came out of COVID funding. We also improved talks about lights and banners and things as part of the recovery from COVID, and that worked well. That was in the initial couple of years. Got to be perfectly honest, there's not been an awful lot since, but the fact that we were able to use that for the COVID recovery funding did actually act as a method of sort of confirming back to residents in particular that things were actually happening, because they spent a lot of time with all the consultations. And I think if it hadn't happened, if we hadn't been able to do something relatively quickly, then that would have been, certainly criticised and wouldn't have helped, shall we say. Going forward, the plans that are left are probably the kind of things that, as a town council, we would not have the resources to deliver. And I fully accept that funding has been difficult to get. It will be interesting to see how this process works out once the consultants are in place to take the next phase forward, really.
Could you remind the committee what the feasibility study will be looking at, please, in Kington?
I'm going to use the term car parking. It's not really car parking. It's to do with moving. We talked about, in particular, moving the fire station and the police station in Kington possibly to another location in order to free up space that might be used either for development or car parking or something like that. One of the problems in Kington is that visitors to the town can't park. They go through. They have to leave. And that's an issue. We don't have the land for it. So it's part and parcel of all of that. We were also looking out to the very centre of Kington, if you're familiar with it, and if you're not, you should be. It's a lovely town. Is the Market Hall, which is very underutilised. It's an old building. It has no facilities in it whatsoever. And if we're going to use it for, in particular for things like festivals and things like that, are what Kington does best, frankly. If you've not been to the wheelbarrow race, seriously, you need to go. And to be able to enhance the Market Hall so that we can then use it more for community type events was the second one. Remind me what the third one was.
So it's really generally a review of town centre car parking.
Yeah.
Which links into the police and fire relocation.
Yeah. And we were also looking at things like employment land at Hatton Garden to provide more employment locally, because people who live in Kington, the employment opportunities for people that live there are very few and far between. And you've just been talking about the local transport policy, and people have to travel. We have no option but to go somewhere else to work, or we have people obviously coming in to work in Kington. And our nearest town of Leominster is short distance away, but we don't have any transport links at all.
Thank you. So, David, just for clarity, will the feasibility study be looking at car parking and employment land, or just car parking?
No, not the employment land. I think that's obviously a future aspiration, and actually it probably typifies part of the challenge we've had around getting a consultant, because it's quite a disparate bunch of activities we're looking for. We're looking for someone that has got expertise on car parking, someone that's got sort of a knowledge of relocating things, and then also looking at a listed building and how we make that work both structurally and in terms of viability. So we've had quite a lot of discussions with consultants to try and encourage them to bring together multidisciplinary teams to take this on board.
That's useful. Okay, thank you. That's a good précis of where we're at. Rather than leaving you to the end, I think should we go to you, Karen, on Teams, if that's all right. From Bromyard, would you like to come in and share your experience with us? That'd be very welcome.
Yeah, sure. Just unmute myself. As per Liz's experience, the consultants that we had doing the plan, we were very happy with. Lots of consultation. As a result of it, a CIC was set up in Bromyard with lots of different stakeholders who were sort of pressing to push forward with the plans. We haven't actually got particularly far with it. There were 5 elements to the economic development plan. One was an eco-hub for Bromyard, an Eastern enhancement project, which also featured a festival site, skills development, the Bromyard Greenway, and also some health and well-being, sort of enhancement of shops and supporting that sort of thing. But we've actually had our first feasibility meeting with the consultants, who are actually the same consultants that wrote the original plan. We had that on the 7th of January. And the outcome was that they're going to focus basically on the expansion of the Linton industrial estate, which also ties in with the local plan, the policies for Bromyard. So they're going to be working up a case for a business case, doing some market research, etc. So that's the immediate priority, and the longer term plans was to take forward the festival site and the Greenway. There are some issues with that because it's the land's in private ownership. But yeah, we're quite excited about the prospect of it. And yeah, we're hopefully going to have another meeting next month, and look forward to seeing the consultants' report at the end of March.
Thank you.
Basically, in a nutshell.
No, thank you, Karen. That's a good overview. Yeah, David, you want to come in?
It was just so it doesn't get lost. I think it's interesting that Bromyard chose to go down the route of setting up a CIC, and there's maybe a kind of learning point in there that as a mechanism to take some of this stuff forward.
So just so that the CIC is this for all of the projects that it's been set up for, or just in one particular project or a number of projects?
Well, they were looking sort of at everything, but I think we've actually lost a couple of strategic members who were sadly passed away, and the progress had sort of faltered. We've not had many meetings, but we're hoping now that with this new plan, we'll just focus on those. The first one being the Linton, and the other ones all sort of longer term. But the other two probably will sit in the background, but we'll just focus on those other ones.
So the expansion of the Linton Industrial Estate would be done through the CIC. Is that the plan?
Well, we don't really know actually at this stage. I think they're there just to try and push things forward, but it's the investment, isn't it? It ties in with Herefordshire Council because there's like 4 acres there of employment land that we're hoping to actually get through. Obviously, the local plan's taken a step back now. I'm guessing that we're going to have to go back and do the spatial options again. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think the driving force is going to be Hereford on this. I think for that particular project with the town council and the other stakeholders, they're supporting and hoping to help with the progression.
Obviously, the feasibility study would help the CIC with any potential business case moving forward. Is that the plan? Yeah, Roger, do you want to come in?
I think this is it's quite a good example that probably applies to all the towns to a certain extent, which is bringing forward kind of capital schemes is complicated, particularly where we don't own land. So the only real land holding that the council's got in the market towns is model farm of any great significance. So the odd building here and there. So in developing a robust business case with planning applications, designs, looking at access, looking at market demand, that's significantly beyond the £25,000 that we've got for the feasibility stage here. And it is partly the gap then when government tends to ask for grant funded bids, they tend to want all of that worked out. So it's usually shovel-ready schemes that have got planning and got all the investment worked out, and then who owns the land is either involved or we're going to buy the land as part of it. So a lot of the projects that are in the market town investment plans are long-standing ambitions for those areas. It's not necessarily just things that have come forward in the kind of 20 to 22 year period. It helps us look at how we construct the case for them. It helps us look at how we can allocate resources to them when we have them to take them forward. But it doesn't necessarily mean that those schemes will happen then overnight, because they are long-standing complex projects. And so the feasibility study in this case will help us understand what are the complexities in terms of bringing forward that proposed extension to Linton Business Park forward, how it might happen, looking at some of the demand and other issues for it, and then look at who the best people are to do that. And certainly Herefordshire Council is keen to work with each of the towns in looking to take forward all of the projects wherever we can. But part of it is working out how can we take these forward, not just what's the next step in then delivering them. Ross was slightly different because we own the site, but it's just bearing that in mind when the plans are great and there's been parts of them that have been delivered, but there are big parts of them that haven't, because the long-standing schemes that have been around in some cases for decades that have got massive complexities to them. We want to work through those complexities. This is a route to doing that, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will all get funded and they will all happen then immediately after feasibility studies are completed.
I absolutely understand, and it's a case of managing expectations. However, what I'm hearing is that the process so far, certainly with the two market towns we've heard from, has on the whole been quite positive. And with the potential of the feasibility studies to make recommendations that could unlock funding to take these individual projects to a shovel-ready stage. That's what I think would be what I'm hearing already would be good, so that if funding does become available, we've got, there's something you can fund straight away, and we're not spending more months, years, bringing in people to work up these projects. So that is something Herefordshire Council could potentially help with. Sorry, Roger. Yeah.
Just really to kind of add on to that, you're absolutely right. The issue has tended to be with these and other schemes is that the investment in getting to shovel ready is a revenue cost, and obviously it's where there's greatest pressure, and it's also a revenue then investment in something that you never know whether you're going to get the money for, and that's the slight quandary we have with kind of the early stages of large capital projects, whatever they are, is how do you invest the revenue money? Where does it come from? How do you choose to put money in hundreds of thousands of pounds into that project over delivering other frontline services without knowing you're going to get necessarily the return at the end of it? And so I guess it's just a recommendation about how we can take forward the priority projects the next stage would be great, but it's just kind of, again, just managing some expectations around how and where that might be funded is a difficult question in the greater scheme of the overall council budget.
Completely agree, but it does feel like a political decision as well. Yeah, okay. I think, sorry, Karen. Sorry, David, you took him in.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to come back to Karen's point about the CIC, and notwithstanding the problems with individuals and capacity, I think whether I'm putting words into her mouth, but I wonder if the CIC adds a bit of capacity to the town council in terms of bringing in people from different backgrounds and actually helping, not quite as a subcommittee, but as a partner group that can take these things forward, that might maybe not progress as quickly with the town council, and bringing in some expertise from business and other elements within the community.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Good. Well, it's good that we've got a model up and running that that we can keep an eye on and see how it works, and it could possibly be copied in other market towns, other areas. Right. Should we move on to Ledbury? Angela, would you like to briefly explain your experience? Thank you.
Yeah, pretty much the same as Karen and Liz in the beginning. We had a number of projects. A key one is about employment land in Ledbury. But again, as been mentioned, the sites are privately owned, so there's a lot of issues that come with that. Some of the areas we looked at were, again, covered in the Great Places to Visit and the Welcome Back Fund projects, so some of those have been completed. Feasibility study-wise, that's one of the areas we looking at the moment. We're looking at our tourism events and markets in our town, try and find a way to improve that as a service to residents and visitors. We've got Rose Regeneration on board with that. They were key in the early stages of the market town investment plans. We've had our first meeting, and we've got our second meeting on Friday. We've got stakeholders involved from all the different groups, so like the tourism, the markets, the events that the different groups that put events on in the town, as well as the council. So, and we've got keys, although we haven't got the CIC like Karen, we've got the same idea going on, where we've got community people that are involved in that. So it'd be interesting to see how it works without the CIC as well, I guess. I did raise this item with my council before I came to get some sort of mandate from them, and they are concerned about the communication that's not happened since the initial stages. It all sort of kicked off, and there was a degree of urgency for it when it kicked off. We were being asked to provide information, and then it's sort of gone silent. One of our projects that we had in there is to do with the station and the station loop and everything in Ledbury. I don't know how many of you are aware, but you go to Ledbury, if you're disabled, you've got to get on the train one side, go to Hereford, and then come back to get on it again. So because there's no bridge or no facility over the track. And that's something that we've been looking at as a council for many years. We've been looking at it with local MP previously. And so that was, but the ward councillors are advising me there is stuff going on, but as a town council, with that being on our project list, we're not being given any updates on that. So we get lots of questions, but we can't answer them because we're not being given that communication. So that is one area that we feel could improve, definitely. And maybe some idea about how the delivery plans will be worked up and what resources will be allocated. We appreciate that it isn't a town council thing. We won't be delivering them. We want to help deliver them. So if we can be told what those delivery plans are and what the resources are and everything, perhaps we can help.
The
another
delivery
stage.
plans for what? Sorry.
For any of the projects that we've got listed there. So in particular, the trains and that, you know, the train station. If there's anything that the town council can do with the community to help deliver these, then they want to know what the plans are when we get to that stage. But yeah.
Okay, just for a bit more clarity, the feasibility study. Could you just give me a bit more detail about what the feasibility study is concentrating on? David, do you want to do that?
Well, means so the kind of underlying side of it is to maximise the tourism opportunities and benefits for Ledbury, really, in terms of creating more of a joined up approach, and that ranges from well, part of that is the markets. So you know how effective are the markets? Are the markets impacting on indigenous local businesses? Are they enhancing that offer? How well promoted are they? So just how well the markets work, but also looking at the visitor information side. The Ledbury Town Council run what I think is a really nice visitor information centre in the Town Council offices. But could that be delivered in a different way? Is it in the right location? And there's also an element where we've encouraged the sort of joined up approach. Since the Market Town investment plans were developed, we now have Herefordshire County Bid as the tourism organisation. How does Ledbury maximise the benefit of having that tourism organisation there, and make sure that Ledbury's doing being as effective as they possibly can in tapping into visitors to the county?
Okay, that's really useful. Thank you. And the communication issues were basically after the roads regeneration came and did the initial work and the long list was worked up. I'm guessing some of the projects were probably funded through recovery. Yeah.
Yes, so some of them we've managed with a shopfront thing. The landscaping at the Master's House, that was covered through that as well. But some of these are quite big projects, so there's no way they were going to be funded because there's more dynamic to them because it's employment land.
Is this things like the employment land, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so
and student accommodation potentially as well.
So what you're saying is that there were some items on your long list that you felt have been put on there as priorities, but there's been no development since that time, other than actually when we've come back in now and talked about, well, David's come in and talked about the feasibility study, and now a project has been selected to move forward. Yeah. And I'm guessing if it had been the employment land, that it would have been too much to do a feasibility study around that. Am I correct, or was it?
I think on the employment land, yeah, probably too much, but also, you know, raising expectations that might not be delivered because it's not within anyone other than the private sector control. So we had, I think, a fairly robust discussion with with representatives of the town council to just identify what the priorities should be. In my description, I should have also said mentioned the term events, because there's now a new space opposite the Master's House, which was developed by the Herefordshire Council and has now been very recently been handed over to Ledbury Town Council to manage as an event space. So it's looking at that, what kind of events could go on there that would enhance Ledbury's position, bring more visitors, and benefit local people.
Thank you. I think Roger, then Councillor Simmons.
Just very quickly, I guess, to add around the communication thing. So getting the communication right with the town and all the parish councils can be obviously tricky, because there's lots of things going on across a very big council, and so the Market Town investment plans have helped kind of channel some of that in terms of what's in the plan, and we have got an allocated economic development officer to lead on engagement with each of the towns. We've had a couple of vacancies that have just been filled in that team, which will help kind of improve some of that. I think some of the examples mentioned, like for example the train station, that's all really into Network Rail and discussions with Network Rail and others. So we need, and then we have been talking to a developer that's looking at land in Ledbury, that's looking to buy land and develop that land. So what we just need to make sure really is that we're then feeding that back to the clerks and having that kind of regular conversation. I guess that would be fair to mention that one of the things that's been happening recently is the leaders started a parish council forum, so there's better communication with all of the parish councils on a regular basis. There is a charter that's being drafted to help look at how communications are better developed, and the leader and the chief exec are currently doing a tour of each of the town councils as a way of kind of covering all issues that come up in the towns, and I think have committed to do that every 6 months. So there's a couple of towns that haven't had theirs yet, but that should help kind of general communications into the towns.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons.
I think it just goes back to communication, and Roger's covered quite a lot of what I was going to say. But my discussions with Angie and Ledbury as town clerk for a ward that I cover, it's the frustration, I think, isn't it, that the timeliness of communications as well, that there can be long sort of passages without any information, then suddenly like a report arriving very late notice when you kind of need to digest it and communicate with the councillors before you can, as clerks, be directed to do anything, I think is really important, that we understand as the council that we need to be better at that for you guys to be able to then communicate with your councillors. I think also I'm taking away from this also that I need to do a better job, and I suspect many of us do as ward members, of communicating with our clerks and being that kind of linchpin to ask the questions of, you know, planning, of economic regeneration, of etc., and pulling those together. So for example, on most of these I know what is sort of going on, but it is about communicating it in a meaningful way to the clerks, I think. So yeah.
David, did you want to come in on there?
I just pick up Councillor Simmons' point and just offer an apology to the town clerks for the late circulation of this report. I think it was just part of the circumstances of being the end of the first week back after the Christmas break, and getting statutory sign-offs and various things on reports just meant it was cutting it fine. But yeah. Sorry about that.
Wasn't a purpose dig at you, David, at all. It's a general thing that we do not get reports generally, I think, to the clerks in a kind of timely way, bearing in mind how far in advance you have to programme your council meetings and agendas. I think that's something we really don't grasp, the amount of time.
Thank you. Julie, do you want to come in from Leominster? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to say about that as well, I took this opportunity to look back on my emails, because this whole process started 4 years ago. So I just had to remind myself how it was for me in the beginning. And I'd only been in post a few months. We were in the middle of a COVID sort of support where our whole council turned over to managing 100 volunteers and a phone line 7 days a week. And then this all started, and the councillors were really excited, positive. But I just, looking back over my emails, I found that I was constantly bombarded for requests for information that I didn't have. And at that point, I was in the office, but all my staff were working from home. Everything had changed for us, so it was tricky. So we had a bit of a bumpy start, but once we'd had the initial, we had a meeting with the cabinet member and members of staff that were involved in the process. We had a walk around the businesses, and it was a really positive start to the whole process that gathered momentum. I think where it sort of all turned a bit pear-shaped was there was a final meeting with Rose Regeneration, and there wasn't a lot of focus, and it was like, oh, can you try and prioritise all these things that were in this plan? And a lot of them, by that time, everything had changed. There was, parts of our plan, there was a Moby hub by the railway station. The land was actually up for sale at the time, but there's no funding available to buy it, and now it's lost because somebody's bought it. And I believe that they're going to try and build houses on there. But the other parts of our plans, the Marsh Court and former Dales site, as a new health centre, that's gone through planning. The Old Priory community asset transfer, Leominster Town Council took that over, and the Market Town's investment plan formed part of the evidence base for us to get a £750,000 grant from the Community Ownership Fund. And then that's led on to a potential more £500,000 in the pipeline, and we're in the middle of a major building project at the moment, which is what we've used our feasibility study for, and to look at potential uses. We'd already had a general feasibility study, but we wanted to drill down into particular uses for the site. We've had our initial, Herefordshire Council have procured the people that are going to deliver the feasibility study, and we've sort of drawn in the transport aspect, because our own initial investigations into uses for the site, particularly an incubation hub, we had meetings with somebody who was really experienced in this. They said that the potential draw of business from South Shropshire is quite high. So we thought we'd get on sort of the bandwagon with that, and they're also looking, as well as potential uses for the building, but how people can get to our building. We're quite lucky we've got the train station as well, but again, the rural buses and that type of thing, of which I don't know if you're aware of the Rural Services Network, but they sort of lobby the government on that type of thing. So yeah, we're members of that as well.
So sorry, your feasibility study is around what?
It's around the old priory, which is a scheduled ancient monument, an asset transfer that we took from Herefordshire Council in September 2022. And yeah, we've got to finish within the next 3 months the first phase of the building project, which is replacing all the windows, replacing the roofs, refurbishing the insides. But it's used as a community space. The uses at the moment are a centre for adults with learning disabilities, a centre for people with dementia, Leominster Food Bank, and some storage. So it's always, and the youth hostel. It's always been used for the community. We're celebrating 900 years of part of that building this year. And it's over the years, it's been a workhouse, a hospital, so it's always supported the town, and that's the idea going forward, that we put in services, or we make it available for services that support the economy, both visitor economy and businesses within the town.
But overall, your experience, you're saying, it's been positive, and it seems to have unlocked a great deal of funding for Leominster.
It's unlocked a lot of funding, yes, and the feasibility hopefully will unlock a lot more. But there are other aspects of there's things like we've got the other end of the Bromyard Greenway as one of our projects, and that's going to be really tricky because a lot of the land has been sold off. It's private dwellings, and I can't quite see how we can take that further forward, although it would be fantastic. And
would you say it was highly likely that without the Market Town investment plan work that was done, that funding probably wouldn't have been unlocked, or do you think it would have happened anyway?
I think it's helped us. There's lots of other evidence, but I think it's helped that we can put that in as something that's been completed. And then, of course, there's the High Street Heritage Action Zone, which the shopfronts shopfront grant scheme, which was done in that's refurbished 3 large buildings in the town. Leominster Town Council put in some of their own money and did a shopfront grant scheme, a very small one, just for repainting, of £500 per property. We did 19, and then Historic England allowed us to use some of the funding as well to carry out another larger scale. I think we did 11 in the end. So that project has sort of allowed us to make the town, upgrade the town really. There's very few empty shops at the moment, and a lot of independent businesses. So that scheme sort of allowed us to progress things further with attracting visitors to the town, and also the public realm scheme, which is nearly at an end, will then start to deliver. We will start to deliver an enhanced programme of events through the town, which will in turn encourage more visitors.
Thank you, Roger.
Just going to say, obviously, we've done quite a lot of work with Leicester because we have the Heritage Action Zone funding, and it really, I think, demonstrates an example about if we were able to access pots of money like that for the other towns as well, just the difference that can be made. I know that there's been challenges along the way with the Leicester House programme, but about £3.5 million gone into culture programmes, community programmes, the public realm, Wi-Fi, enhancement to the historic buildings, shop fronts. Which has made a really big impact, I think, for the town. But also, in addition to that, it just shows what can be achieved when Herefordshire Council and the town councils work closely together, because we couldn't have achieved any of the things that have been successful through the Leicester Heritage Action Zone without Julie and her team and the Leicester Town Council, who've delivered lots of it themselves, but also provided that hugely important link to the businesses and local people that the town councils have, that we don't, the relationships that we don't necessarily have at a county level. So that's not just because of the Market Town Investment Plan, because the Heritage Action Zone predates the plan, but the plans give us a route to being able to apply for those kinds of money. And I think we've learnt a lot about how we can work better between a kind of a county council and a local and a town council along the way. Although Julie's probably got lots of scars from some of the challenges and that we've had in trying to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, David.
It just got me thinking about, obviously Roger and Julie both talked about a number of the big capital programs and so on. One of the things we're picking up on, and it picks up on the point about revenue support and ongoing support. So next week, we're one of the gaps in Leicester in terms of supporting and taking things forward and maximising the impact of the town is a lack of coordinated approach to businesses. So we're working with partners to pull together a business association, business organisation, so that all the great things, the public realm improvements and so on, we've got businesses actually shouting about that, businesses working together, putting on events, doing things that actually improve and build on all that positive work. So hopefully, very soon, within the next month or so, we should have some kind of business association, business group, which will bring the businesses, some of whom we've been working very closely with, and the town council particularly, just bring them into more of a structure so that we can all communicate better. They're more aware and improve communications, but also that they can do their bit to build on the really good work that's happened in Leicester.
Thank you, David. Carla Boyles, would you like to speak on behalf of Ross Town Council, please?
Thank you. I can't really talk much about the process because that was my predecessor who dealt with that, so I'm not really aware. The projects that were brought forward in there, there's been, I would say, more progress recently on the big projects such as the Enterprise Park and Broadmeadow and Tanyard Lane, which has just been brought forward for some master planning, which is I've been told has appointment. The consultants have been appointed for that. With other projects, there were, I think, only one of ours was probably COVID recovery, was done under the COVID recovery money. But there has been progress on other ones. The Ryfield Centre, which was put in there, obviously Herefordshire Council are now back in there. And the Riverside Canoe bunkhouse, that has actually now been bought privately and is being developed. So that is not something that we had any involvement with, but is a very good outcome. And other than that, our feasibility. So the skate parks obviously had a lot of progress as well. That's been looked at by the section. That's a project the Section 106 team at Herefordshire Council are working on with the working group. So that is moving forward as well, which is another big project. And then our feasibility study is being done. So initially,
we were trying to look at, so our first idea was the Broadmeadow Tanyard project, but then we were told that that was going to be covered by the master planning, so that we didn't need to use the feasibility money for that. So we looked at the Market House and Apron Plaza and High Street pedestrianisation projects, and we're trying to look at both of those, but I'm sure David will explain, but that was too much for the one feasibility project, so we didn't get any interest on that. So we've now reduced the scope and are just looking at the high street pedestrianisation.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on that, David?
By all means. So I mentioned earlier that the getting consultants on board for some of these projects has been a bit of a challenge, and this is one where we did go out to tender or for quote in November for both the pedestrianisation project and the Market House apron project. I think so, and we received no tenders. So rather than leaving it at that, we went back to the companies and asked why they hadn't tendered, and it was the scope of the project, both in terms of the overall scale. I think they reflected that looking at pedestrianisation scheme is a big project in itself, and also probably the disparate nature. You know, one was a pedestrianisation scheme, and the other was a heritage development scheme, and we have a relatively tight timescale window. So we, in discussion, and we had to move quite quickly because Christmas was looming. So in discussion with Carla, we made the decision, which I reported back to the town council this week, to reduce the scope, just go out in a pedestrianisation scheme, and fingers crossed. And I will keep my fingers crossed. We've got companies that look like they're interested in that, because what we don't want is to fail again to get another tender and still be sitting here in several weeks' time with nothing happening. So all being well, we will have a company on board. Probably not, but having them on board, it doesn't stop us having an informal discussion with them about their views on the Market House project. But predominantly, I think we took the view that the bigger project and the more significant project, and one that needs a lot more of that work to potentially get something closer to being shovel ready, is the pedestrianisation project.
Thank you, David. I know there's going to be questions. I just wanted to kick off, if that's all right, then I'll open it up to the committee.
No, it's not all right.
It's not okay. Okay. My first question, I think we've answered. My first question was stakeholders sufficiently engaged in the development of the Market Town investment plans? And what I seem to be hearing from all the clerks is that it seems like you were. Would that be a fair, that you both yourselves and the councils and relevant stakeholders were engaged initially? But one thing which is great, and is a big tick. And the other thing I've heard from that is it has unlocked funding, and things have happened. There's been progress, and it's unlocked significant investment in some cases, and it's moved forward long-term, or helped to move forward some long-term ambitions. For instance, a model farm in Ross, which had been on the back burner for a very long time. So while it doesn't take, well, I'm sure it can't take all the credit for moving it forward at all, but it certainly helped. But one of the things I heard, one of the quotes, was that now everything's changed. And I'm sure who was it? I think it might have been Leinster. I think you might have said everything's changed from when the initial work was done. And I think that's interesting, because what I'm hearing here is, this was great. It was really useful. We worked up a lot of projects. It's unlocked funding. We've got this long list of projects we want to move forward. We're now working on, an initial project that we're doing to feasibility, so we're taking it to shovel ready. But if everything's changed, and I'm sure that's the case in all of the market towns, then is there an argument for Herefordshire Council looking at how this can be potentially a rolling process, where we're keeping an eye on how things are changing within the market towns on a regular basis, and it becomes a long list of project that evolves and changes, so that priorities, we're not just, as one of the other criticisms that came back here was, it went cold for a couple of years, then communication suddenly started up again. Oh, let's do a feasibility study. Now we got this one. I think this should be a continual dialogue. That's what it feels like, and I wonder whether there's an argument for having a long list of projects for each of the market towns that evolves and changes as the situation evolves and changes. You know, with over an annual or biannual process, so that that then ensures these long lists are kept up to date. I don't know whether you think about that as a potential idea, Roger.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea to kind of have that kind of pipeline and that regular review, and to ensure that there's kind of clear communications going on generally around that. I think some things I mentioned before around the kind of leader and the chief exec regular meeting the town councils and other things I think will help escalate up where things aren't moving. We need to make sure that now that we've got a fully staffed ED team, that kind of one-to-one relationship that we intend to have in place is there as well in order to kind of do that. But to do a kind of what we don't have at the moment is a kind of, I guess, an annual review of are the priorities still right? Have we moved forward with the projects, and how might we move them forward, and what are the opportunities that are going to come up in the next few months that we're aware of in order to take some of those things forward would be a good way of kind of enhancing and better taking forward what we've currently got.
Okay, Councillor Phillips and then Councillor Cornthwaite.
Yes, thank you. I should declare an interest as I'm chairman of the Rural Services Network, so and very pleased that Leicester has joined the Market Towns Forum. First thing to say is carrying on from my theme of the last meeting, the last item, was the problem that we've got with the funding of rural local authorities now is that we lack the capabilities of discretionary spend. So much of our budget is on what we have to deliver, our care services, our social care, our transport, etc. And then those discretional things that you have, which can include very important things like leisure and culture, and I would bring in some of the elements that has been talked about, we are now getting very restricted on that. And, you know, the fact that the likes of Manchester get a 10% bonus in their recent settlement, and whereas we had an actual financial cut, just goes to emphasise. And I use that as an example because, I mean, I was very much involved with the Master's House project in Ledbury when I was cabinet member and got that delivered. We got it delivered because the council had the capacity to support it. It was pretty hectic at times, and thank God nobody asked an FOI request about the scaffolding costs. But I'm aware that that is now not possible, and it's not possible because of lack of political ambition. It's resources. So we're in a different area, and so this is why the approach that we've got here, I think, is very important, to coordinate everybody to work together to single objectives. You've got to manage expectations with that, particularly when you're involved with partners like the private sector and private individuals who are quite key to that. But I do think engaging with them on a wider vision for the town and the community is absolutely essential. And as we said, I always say it's on the shelf ready, but the shovel ready, I'll accept that as well, is getting it there ready for when the money comes, you've got it there. And I think that's very advisable. And to work with the private sector, the public sector, I know, for instance, that Kington matured the idea of moving the fire station, but there was a lack of dialogue with the fire authority. So now you see that the fire authority has got nowhere in its capital programme about the relocation of Kington Fire Station, whereas Leicester Fire Station is on the programme to be relocated to where the new training centre is on the old police station. So you've got that liaison there. I think the issue that I have, and you'd expect me to have it coming representing a rural authority, is sometimes the engagement of the rural hinterland. Market towns exist because they were the service centres for their rural hinterland, and to some extent they have suffered from that lack of engagement. I know that in my part of the world, if you went to school, if you actually went to school and you were brought up there, you consider Kington to be your local market town. The new people that move into Pembridge consider Leicester to be their market town, because that's just the way it is. And you can almost split them down the line. And I do encourage that as you go forward with this, you just engage a little more with that rural hinterland so that they have not only an understanding of what you're doing, but you actually strengthen that loyalty to your local market town. I'll use Kington as an example. We have a site at Kington which belongs in my ward, which is absolutely pivotal to the entrance to Kington. And we must have a dialogue about what we're going to do with that toll house. As far as Lions Hall is concerned, it's a long way from Lions Hall, but it is an absolute unfortunate looking sad building at the moment. And we need to have some joint thinking about what we do there. And I'm sorry to pick on Liz, but Liz, I know Liz was nodding. There's an example of, you know, sometimes, and because of course our market towns have expanded to their boundaries, if we're going to take on all these houses, then you are going to have to engage with that. So I do urge, and perhaps one of my recommendations is that as we go forward, that we, you know, that you look to engage your rural communities. I know your rural, you know, hinterland. I know that there's enough people on the list to engage with already, but I do urge you to do that, because I think that's quite important, as well as an annual sort of update as to where we are on these things. But and looking at the priorities going forward, car parking, industrial estate, joined up tourism, you know, the next stage is very much a variety of priorities going forward. But it's absolutely essential that we do it and manage that expectation with people. So, and particularly encouraging community groups, the heritage money, you know, lottery funding and that's probably going to be our more practical access. So if we can work with the private and community sectors, then I think we've got a job on. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Phillips. I think, you know, now we have a new funding officer. I think all of these opportunities, it is a case of, you know, I'm keenly aware that capacity within the market towns is at a premium. We can't expect the market towns to raise this money themselves. So there is a role for us as a council, certainly, to help both with capacity and delivery. Councillor Cornthwaite, then Councillor Simmons.
So thank you for the report. And I'd been looking at the issues that were affecting each of the towns and then their targets and thinking, how realistic were the targets for 5 years? Then realised the report was dated 2021. So effectively the 5-year targets should be completed next year. So my question would be, how many of those will actually be on course to achieve by next year? And or how long should that target be moved forward? Because now that we've listened and heard what you're saying, I think we should try to get more on top of it. And then I think Roger may have well answered the question, how do we as a county council maintain strong links with the towns so that we can help and ensure that you're getting what you're looking for?
Do you want to come back, Roger, before I pass over to Councillor Simmons?
This one or that one? This one. It's very rare you get two Rogers in a room. But they are on it, yeah. I think in terms of the review, then I think as Councillor Driscoll mentioned, doing that kind of annual review where we are in terms of priorities, and we can review the outcomes, the 5-year outcomes. I suspect it would be a bit of a mix. Some things have progressed, which we've heard about today. Some things will have moved as far as we would have liked. And I think in doing that will help with some of the communications things. I think one of the things we can also refresh is just making sure that we've got that strong economic development officer to town, to Clark, kind of communications going on kind of day to day and month to month as well.
I also think there will be some value, and I've said this around section 106, when we're looking at the long lists of ambitions, of us actually being realistic and being a critical friend both with the town councils, with the market towns, and saying, well, actually, this isn't going to happen through us. Or whatever, that might be a priority, but or you know, so that the list is a realistic document, is achievable, and that, you know, they're smart targets, and they're not ambitions that are never going to see the light of day. I think being that frank and that honest, it would be, yeah, 2 franks would be would be quite useful. And Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Chair. Just off the back of Roger's comments really, and your own, trying to understand where these market town investment plans are held within the council's collective consciousness, really. So, for example, when we have organisations within the market towns, voluntary organisations bidding for funds, are we as the kind of grant awarding body referencing back to these market town investment plans? Because it may be that the organisations that are applying aren't really aware that this is a bigger thing, and should we not be giving priority in that kind of investment cycle? So that's the first sort of question, like getting that acknowledgement and awareness that this is a port that got parked potentially in some respects, and then kind of comes to life whenever there's some funding that we go, oh, hang on, we're still delivering these. But I think there needs to be a greater consciousness of them. The other bit is things like the Herefordshire County bid. Are we getting, I'd like to understand from the clerks if they feel they're getting enough representation of your areas within the county bid. Is it all being located in one particular, is it focused on Hereford, for example? Is that your perception? I'm trying to understand how we can get those plans supported by all these other structures that the council have, pushed out to other organisations, really. So, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Roger. Sorry,
that's the other one. So I think just to answer the first question, so the market town investment plans are live documents, certainly within the economy and environment kind of part of the council. Having said that, it could be probably better represented across the council as a whole. So it's community grant schemes that are coming forward. So the planners are aware of them, and when we were looking at kind of starting evidence base for the local plan and other things, they do review and were reviewing the market town investment plans to see what priorities were in them. For example, when we developed the UK Shared Prosperity Investment Plan, that was considered, the market town investment plans and the things that we could fund was considered as part of the development of that. But it's not perfect by any means. So there's certainly an opportunity for us to kind of make people across the council more broadly aware of the plans and to use them as a route to kind of reference within applications for grant funding and other things to us, as well as when we're making onward grants to applications to others. Obviously, let the clerks answer around the DBID. I guess just to flag that the town councils have a seat on the board of the DBID, which Councillor Driscoll takes on behalf of the. That there have been, in my experience, Diane, who's the chief exec, has been quite proactive in engaging with the towns, and David attends as an observer the destination bid board as well to help provide some of that linkage. But the clerk's obviously better placed to talk about what the relationship with the DBID is.
Yeah, I'll ask the clerks just to clarify. I am for the sake of transparency, I am a board director of the DBID, but I was asked to stand, not to represent all of the market towns. I was asked to stand as a representative from a market town when I was a town councillor originally. Just for clarity. Yes, would we? Sorry, do you want to say?
I'm not sure that's our impression. As market towns, we were told by the bid initially that we couldn't all have a representative on the bid from all our councils. It had to be one, and that you were our representative initially, and that would then move round to each town council each year. The first year they didn't meet very well, so they said they were going to extend you for the second year. But that's all that's ever happened. And to be honest, I don't know about these guys, but we don't get a lot of feedback from any meetings. We are starting to get a bit more feedback from the bid about what's going on and stuff, but we're not getting feedback from the meetings for the bid. I don't know.
Thanks, Angela. I know that was raised on behalf of Ledbury at the last DBID meeting, and I know that Diane is talking to or planning to organise a series of meetings, and I offered my services to go around and talk at the different town councils. So I know that is on the back burner. So yes, that will be something I'm been told that will happen. But I'm very happy if we want to hear from the market towns around how your relationship has been with the DBID. I know there's been summer projects and bits and pieces. I'm not sure this is what we're supposed to be talking about now, but if that, it seems to have come up in conversation. Sorry, yeah, Carla, do you want to start?
I don't know whether other market towns do, but we joined the DBID as a voluntary member so that we have access to the place informatics, visitor data, etc. But so that's been useful, and we have also accessed the funding that they make available, and they do a drop-in in Ross, which we can go and meet with them, and they do ask us to specifically go and meet with them when they're in Ross if they've got something that they think would be of interest or they'd like some discussion on. So we found, I agree, we probably, obviously we're best placed to get feedback from the board meetings, but I wouldn't say there's any central feedback that comes out from those meetings. I probably only find that out from Councillor O'Driscoll. So yeah, I don't think there probably could be better communication from those meetings.
Councillor Simmons?
Sorry, I wasn't meaning this to be a critique of Herefordshire bid. I just think it's one of the mechanisms that we can be dealing with some of these market town investment plans, because they obviously relate to culture and tourism, the market provision. So I think it's quite important that we pick this up in the scrutiny and somehow deal with that.
I am reminded that actually it is an item for the Scrutiny Committee later this year, is actually looking at the DBID specifically, and that's something that will be coming onto the agenda. Yes, sorry, Carla.
Sorry, just to say one more thing. I noticed that there is a lot of difference between what the county bid and the Hereford City bid do. So I find that us as a town council deliver a lot of the things that the bid deliver for the city, and so I think there's a vast difference between what the two bids do and what the town city council have to do, because the bids do or don't do.
Roger, would you like to just explain that? I think that'd be useful.
Yeah, so just kind of explaining, it's a fair point, and it's probably the starting thing to say is that the business improvement districts, both for the city and the county, completely separate organisations from the council. They're independent, limited by guarantee companies. When a bid is created, it has a 5-year term, and there's a ballot of local businesses to decide whether they want to deliver a 5-year business plan that sets out what they would deliver, and it's the business plan that kind of dictates what the focus of each bid will be. So for the city bid, it's primarily, it's within a mile ring fenced of Hereford City Centre. Its members are mainly retailers, and the retailers are paying a levy, and a lot of the focus is around city centre enhancements and improvements and public realm events and other things. Although interestingly, they've just been through a ballot for their next 5-year term, and they are now focusing more on tourism than they have done in the previous 10 years before that. The county bid is often referred to as a destination business improvement district. So their primary focus is actually around tourism and independent retail enhancement. So it's not the physical works or so much within the towns. It's more about how we promote Herefordshire as a place to visit and how we add to some of the kind of cultural and other offer around that. So they have got very different kind of purposes. And they're legally bound to do what was in that 5-year plan. I think the business plan actually had 2 places on the board for town council representation of some kind, or when it was first written. I think the obvious issue is that you couldn't have all 6 or 5 towns and the city represented on the board, and because it would just, the numbers of people would just be too many to manage the bid company. But that was defined by the company. It's not defined by the council.
Thanks, Roger. Bruce, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you. There's an item that's appeared on the Leinster programme and the Bromyard, which is regarding the Greenway project. In case any of my colleagues aren't aware of it, it's the repurposing of an old railway line that runs across the north of the county. And I think there's another one down the Golden Valley somewhere. But this has caused a lot of aggravation in my patch with the people who actually live on the railway line. The one that comes to mind is Rowden Mill Station, which is on the cusp of Bromyard and Breedenbury. I went down there last year as an invited guest. They were awarded a plaque for their business acumen. and they've done a fantastic job there. But they live on they own the whole site. They live on the station, and they've developed some of the buildings and railway carriages in the sidings there as Airbnbs and what have you. And it's a fantastic site. Now, someone who's running this Greenway project, I don't know how it's been done. It's never come through council, but they've said, oh, well, we'll buy that place and turn it into toilets and a cafe. And of course, this has really worried the residents who live there. Further down the track towards Leominster, there's the Hatfield station where other people still live, and no one seems to have taken them into account. I'm not sure how many other stations there are going towards you, Julie, but there's probably at least one at Leominster. I think this is all part of the old railway from Worcester to Leominster, isn't it? I'm not quite sure where it starts at Bromyard, but I think we need some clarification in the reports, really, to say, well, is this feasible? If it's not feasible, I think the whole thing should be boshed.
And engagement with the rural communities.
Well, certainly that, but somebody somewhere, and someone's got some authority over this, they need to decide whether this is a feasible project. It's an exciting, it could be an exciting project, apart from the residents who live on the line. And so we've got to take them into account. And if it's not a feasible project, it needs to be scrapped in order to give these people peace of mind.
Thanks, Bruce. That feels like a piece of work that would be part of the ongoing process as we continue to develop these plans. But Roger, if you want to mention.
So just to add, so those projects aren't council projects as such. They're led by local community groups who are keen to reinstall those connections. So they're mentioned in the plans as things that the local stakeholders came up with and said that they wanted to do, but they're not kind of adopted council projects, and we're not looking to put those connections in ourselves. We did fund some feasibility through some COVID recovery money to look at that route and another route, just to look at what the potential for it would be. The issue is, as I think was raised before, is that the routes now are in multiple ownerships that have been kind of sold over the years. It would be hugely complicated to re-establish the routes and to put the connections back in now. It doesn't mean that other routes can't necessarily be looked at, but the only people that are taking forward those schemes are those local community groups that still are interested in and want to kind of take those forwards. Obviously, with the council's happy to work with anyone who wants to look at how we enhance the county, but would have to bear in mind the impact on all residents and looking at what might happen.
Thank you. I've got one more question then, Councillor Owens, and then I will look at drawing things to a conclusion so we can get some recommendations together before the end of the meeting. One of the things that occurred to me was that obviously a lot of projects have come to fruition through the Market Towns investment plans. And I wondered, have we had any plans, or have we fed these through the social value engine?
We haven't at the moment, no. It's obviously something that we're working on. I think as it came up when we discussed did the review around the capital programme. Was that here, or was that the General Management, Scrutiny Management Board? But we can, there was elements of social value looked at by Rose Regeneration, the consultants, in drafting the reports, but it's not been run through the engine, and we've not got clear targets necessarily around social value at the moment.
I think it might be worth making a recommendation that it is fed through the social value engine, because I think it would strengthen the case for why there should be a continued programme of development of the Market Towns investment programme moving forward, reviewed on an annual basis, so we're keeping all these projects live. Yes, Roger.
Yeah, I'm just...
Sorry, Roger, it's Councillor Owens, then it's you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to add on the Greenway thing. It's my understanding that a lot of these projects are often linked to the National Cycle Network, which is kind of a very long-standing project that's been overseen by Sustrans. And just to reinforce what Roger was saying, they are done through local groups and people. I was on the Greenway sort of committee for Hereford that sort of delivered the river bridge for cycling and walking. So yeah, I think it's just perhaps allay Councillor Baker's fears. Certainly local people's concerns are taken into account, and they follow sort of often old train routes for obvious reasons, but they can be rerouted, so they work with local people. Just wanted to give that reassurance.
Thank you, Councillor Owens. Councillor Phillips.
Yeah, it was just that, you know, in the feedback, we have a tendency today to be able to say, well, this is what's wrong and this is what needs to be improved. But I think what we've also got from this conversation is that there's a lot that has happened. And I think it's worth that we make sure that we record that, because that should, you know, help us going forward into the coordinating and consulting on future. And I'm quite anxious that we do that as well, because I think it's important that we recognise what we have achieved. There's an awful lot we can't, and we're struggling to. But let's get that in perspective as well, so that you know, that hopefully and then encourages and gives live examples as we start to, you know, to firm up on the other new priorities. Yeah, well, we managed to do this, so you know, it isn't a hopeless cause.
100%, and I think the message I'm hearing loud and clear, and I'm pleased it's the message we're going to be presenting, is that on the whole this has been a great success and deserves additional investment to keep it live and keep it going in the future. And I think that's one of the messages I'd like to send to the council. Yeah, David.
Yeah, can I just take us back to a point Councillor Simmons made about where these sit in terms of supporting funding applications? I was thinking that you know, obviously at town council, a town area level, they sit alongside the neighbourhood action plans as well. So I think they need to be looked at as an overall evidence base. And you, Chair, mentioned in passing, but I just wanted to make sure we're clear, the council has got a new funding officer, community funding officer, and I think I saw some raised eyebrows from the town clerk, so we need to make sure that's communicated. To be fair, I think the person's only been in post just before Christmas, so we can do that. But certainly when they're talking to potential applicants, we need to make sure that they remember that there's a neighbourhood action plan, there's a market town investment plan. These are things that support. On the converse of that, and I had a conversation with Councillor Simmons about something similar last week. What we don't want to do is make funding applications, particularly to ourselves, overly complicated. And we, in administering the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we have had perhaps some criticism, but certainly some discussions with applicants about not making it too complicated. So we don't want to say, you know, that applicant, we actually amended application processes as record, because we were saying, you know, cite various council policies, cite this, where does it fit in with, you know, various strategies. And actually applicants who are applying for community funds have a project they just want to apply. So that's probably our behind the scenes evaluation to say, does this fit with the market town investment plan? Does it fit with neighbourhood action plan? Does it fit with economic development strategy and so on? So I think there's a discussion there, but certainly the positive thing probably worth noting is the new community funding officer.
Do they have a name?
Yes, that's what I was
Jamie Perry.
That's so nice to know.
Jamie. Jamie Perry, and he wasn't responsible for writing Dad's Army.
That's a pity.
Sorry. Okay. I think this has been a very successful meeting. Thank you. I'd like to thank you. I'd particularly like to thank the clerks for making the time to come here today. It's greatly appreciated. And we know you are the unsung heroes of our county, so thank you so much for coming along today. It's hugely appreciated, and I'm pleased that you've all had a chance to speak. I hope you've all had, if there's nothing else people wanted to say before we wrap it up, but I think we've heard loud and clear communication is vitally important. But we're very pleased that these projects have, on the whole, and the market town investment plans have been well received, and I want to try and make sure we send a message that we keep this going and we keep this momentum going, and that communication doesn't fall off, and that we continue to build on the good work that's happened to date. So thank you very much for coming today. What I'm going to suggest is that we suspend the live feed for 10 minutes or so. If we say 10 minutes, while we work up our recommendations, then we'll start the live feed again and we'll put the Thank you. I'm going to ask the scrutiny officer if he could read out the recommendations, please. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. These are the recommendations for the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee at the 15th of January 2025. For the first item on the local transport plan, it has made 4 recommendations as follows. As per a previous recommendation from the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee, environmental protection and enhancement needs to be better reflected throughout the high-level local transport plan objectives and throughout its priorities for the transport network.
Sorry, could we have the correct slide up on the screen, please?
Oh, pardon me. Okay, starting again, unfortunately. As per a previous recommendation from Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee, environmental protection and enhancement needs to be better reflected throughout the high-level local transport plan objectives and throughout its priorities for the transport network. This should reflect and align with our climate and ecological emergency declaration. The local transport plan will work with other rural local transport plan teams in England, as well as our neighbouring authorities, to build on best practice and an alliance of rural local transport plans to strengthen the case for rural transport to the government. To provide the committee with a consultation strategy for the local transport plan to include a timeline for the consultation and a list of consultees. And finally, to ensure that any active travel projects are shovel ready for any funding that becomes available. Chair, first.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a vote on these recommendations on the LTP. I'm happy to propose. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Phillips, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Passed.
Thank you, Chair. And here are the recommendations for the second item in today's meeting, the Market Towns Investment Plan. There are 4 recommendations. Herefordshire Council 2. Recognise that the Market Town Investment Plans are living documents with projects that are regularly reviewed and updated. Work with town councils to review annually the list of projects in each of the Market Towns investment plans. Ensure regular communications between the council and Herefordshire's market towns. And finally, encourage town councils to engage with their rural hinterlands on their ambitions, thus strengthening the understanding and loyalty to their local service centre. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have a proposer for this? Yeah, Councillor Cornthwaite. Seconder, Councillor Phillips. All those in favour? Lovely. That's passed. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Thank you, everybody online. I think we now have our next item on the agenda is to look at our work programme moving forward for 24-25. Are we going to, can you put that up on the screen, please? Thank you.
Yes, Chair, I'll just share that in a moment.
I'm probably nearer, actually. I'll do it.
No, I've got it on.
Okay, just to remind people what we've got coming up, at our March meeting, we'll be looking, can we move up to the March, please? Scroll down, thank you. March, we'll be looking at the highway maintenance programme. We'll have the Service Director of Environment and Highways. There'll be an overview of the winter service. We're also looking, hopefully, at the Hereford City Master. So I just went my microphone with it. Hereford City Master Plan, and we're waiting for an exact little bit more information on what they will be providing in March. Councillor Simmons?
Can I just check, did they say that the LTP draft was coming back in March and that you were looking at putting that on your...
We did have a brief discussion. We apparently it is on our agenda for May, but I was quite pleased to see that it was to be ready in March, which means hopefully we'll have it in time.
So do you think you'll move that to March? No.
At this stage, I would just be delighted to have eyes on it in time for our May meeting.
Sounds like an excellent plan.
Yes, we were aware of that that slight, although it was done in all innocence. In fairness, Councillor Simmons. So the May at the moment we're looking at the cultural strategy. I've had a very positive meeting around that already, and that will be obviously we decided to look at that because we're at the midpoint of the cultural strategy 2019 to 2029, and we're looking at progress on that and how we can move that forward. And then we have the LTP again in May. If we could scroll down, please. And then at the moment we're looking at tourism and destination management. Again, that's I mentioned earlier in the meeting that we were looking at the DBID later this year, but this is also looking at the destination management strategy for the council as a whole, and our approach and how we feel, how much we should be involved with the DBID and how much we should have our own strategy in-house as well, as far as destination management is concerned. And there's areas to be discussed around that, including apprenticeships and everything within the tourism sector, and what we can do to build on that. And we have the exciting, and well, it is very exciting to me particularly, the looking at gully cleansing and drainage and the improvements that have been made based on the motion that was passed last year, and all the investment that's underway. And I think we can leave it there. If everybody's happy with that as our work programme, I think do we need to? I think we do have we need to propose and second that as our work programme, unless.
I think it would be good to agree that.
Okay, everybody happy that that's our draft work programme for the coming months? Yes. Councillor Baker proposes it. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cornthwaite, all those in favour? Yeah, thank you. So that's our draft programme. Thank you very much. Just to confirm the date of our next meeting, scheduled is Wednesday the 12th of March. Is it really at 10 a.m. again? Yes, it is. Yeah. Thank you. Wednesday the 12th of March at 10 a.m. Look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very, very much. If we could